At the podium stood President Tyson, Earth's representative, a figure of calculated composure amidst a sea of skeptical faces. Tyson's sharp, blue-gray eyes scanned the room, taking in a cacophony of murmured voices and disdainful glances. He was used to this. Humanity had clawed its way into the Galactic Council, not through military might or ancient lineage, but through relentless determination and ingenuity. To many in this chamber, Earth was an anomaly, a species that refused to know its place. From his seat, Roxer, a reptilian council member with scales the color of molten gold, leaned forward, his slitted eyes narrowing. "President Tyson," he hissed, his voice carrying a faint echo. "The council grows tired of your persistent calls for equality. Humanity's position here is tenuous at best. Perhaps you should learn to observe and listen rather than demand." Tyson's lips curved into a faint smile, his hands clasped behind his back. "With respect, Counselor Roxer," he replied evenly, "humanity doesn't believe in sitting idly by. We've learned the hard way that progress only comes to those who fight for it." The chamber fell into a tense silence, broken only by the quiet hum of the holographic projections. Several counselors exchanged glances, their body language ranging from annoyance to veiled amusement. King Sorhin, the towering ruler of the Ovari Empire, sat at the far end of the room, his presence commanding. His obsidian-black eyes locked onto Tyson with an unreadable intensity. Tyson felt the weight of Soren's gaze, but refused to show any sign of discomfort. He had faced worse than disapproving looks in his lifetime. As the session continued, Mike Gray, Tyson's aide, leaned close to whisper. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his sharp features betrayed a constant vigilance. "Something feels off, sir," Mike murmured, his voice barely audible. "Security's lighter than usual, and I've spotted unfamiliar faces in the chamber." Tyson didn't respond immediately, his expression remaining neutral. "Keep an eye on them," he said softly, his tone betraying no hint of concern. "But don't act unless we're certain." The meeting dragged on, counselors bickering over trade agreements and territorial disputes, but Tyson's mind was elsewhere. His instincts, honed over years of navigating dangerous waters, were screaming at him. Something wasn't right. Then it happened. A faint whirring sound filled the air, barely noticeable at first, but growing steadily louder. Tyson's eyes darted to the source, a small drone hovering near the ceiling, its metallic surface glinting under the chamber's lights. Before anyone could react, the drone emitted a sharp beep, and an explosion ripped through the room. The force of the blast sent shock waves through the chamber, shattering the holographic projections and toppling seats. Counselors screamed, their voices blending into a cacophony of panic. Tyson was thrown to the ground, his ears ringing and his vision swimming. Mike was at his side in an instant, pulling him behind an overturned table. "Assassins!" Mike spat, his voice urgent. "They're here for you." Tyson's vision cleared just in time to see a group of armed figures storming into the chamber. Their faces were obscured by masks, but their movements were precise military. These weren't ordinary mercenaries. They were professionals. The leader of the group stepped forward, his voice amplified by a translator device. "Tyson," he called, his tone cold and commanding. "Your time has come. Humanity's arrogance ends today." Tyson rose slowly, ignoring Mike's warning grip on his arm. His suit, once pristine, was now torn and stained with dust. Despite the chaos, his demeanor remained calm, almost unervingly so. "You've gone to a lot of trouble," Tyson said, his voice cutting through the noise. "But I have to ask, did you really think this would work?" The leader tilted his head, clearly puzzled by Tyson's lack of fear. "You're surrounded, human. Accept your fate." Tyson took a step forward, his expression hardening. "You should have done your homework. You don't know who I am, do you?" There was a flicker of hesitation in the leader's stance, but it was too late. Tyson moved with a speed and precision that defied his polished exterior. In an instant, he grabbed a broken piece of the table and hurled it like a spear, striking one of the assassins in the throat. The room erupted into chaos once more. Mike, armed with a concealed pistol, joined the fray, providing cover as Tyson dismantled the attackers with brutal efficiency. His movements were calculated, almost mechanical, each strike designed to incapacitate or kill. It was as though a switch had been flipped, and the composed president was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. The surviving assassins began to retreat, dragging their wounded comrades with them. The leader, now visibly shaken, pointed a trembling finger at Tyson. "This isn't over," he snarled before disappearing through the smoke. Tyson watched them go, his breathing steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He turned to Mike, who was staring at him with a mixture of shock and awe. "Sir," Mike began, his voice unsteady, What the hell was that?" Tyson adjusted his torn suit, his expression unreadable. "A reminder," he said quietly, "that some things are best left undisturbed." As the smoke began to clear, the remaining counselors emerged from their hiding places, their faces pale and their eyes wide. King Soren remained seated, his gaze fixed on Tyson. For the first time, there was a hint of respect in the alien king's expression. But Tyson wasn't interested in the council's opinions. His mind was already racing, piecing together the events of the attack. He knew this was only the beginning. "Mike," he said, his tone sharp, "find out who sent them, and prepare for a long night. We've got work to do." With that, he strode out of the chamber, his posture unyielding despite the chaos around him. The galaxy had just declared war on him, and they were about to learn why that was a mistake. The council chamber was silent now, save for the faint crackle of damaged electronics and the occasional groan of the injured. Declan Tyson stood at the edge of the carnage, his sharp eyes scanning for clues among the rubble. His body was still, but his mind moved with relentless precision, analyzing every detail, every fragment of the attack. The council guards were securing the area, but Tyson knew better than to trust them. He had learned long ago that enemies often wore the guise of allies. Mike approached cautiously, a datapad in hand, his usually steady demeanor now tinged with unease. "Sir, preliminary scans suggest the attackers used cloaking technology. High-end stuff, likely military grade. This wasn't just some hired crew." Tyson nodded, his gaze fixed on a fractured piece of the drone that had initiated the explosion. "No," he said, his voice low but firm. "This was a message, and whoever sent it wanted to make sure I understood it loud and clear." Mike hesitated, watching his president carefully. There was something about the way Tyson carried himself now, a subtle shift in his posture, his tone, like a blade being unsheathed. It was unsettling, even for someone who had worked closely with him for years. "You knew, didn't you?" Mike finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You knew something like this was coming." Tyson's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile that held no humor. "I suspected," he admitted. "The council has been teetering for months, and humanity's presence here threatens too many vested interests. But this was bolder than I expected." Mike leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Sir, you moved back there like you've done this before, and not just once or twice. What aren't you telling me?" For a moment, Tyson didn't answer. Instead, he picked up the shard of the drone, turning it over in his hand as if it held the answers to 1,000 unspoken questions. Then, with a sigh, he placed it down and met Mike's gaze. "Before I became president of Earth," Tyson began, his voice measured and deliberate, "I wasn't a politician. I wasn't a leader. I wasn't anything you'd want to put on a pedestal." He paused, as if weighing his words. "I was a weapon." Mike blinked, caught off guard by the admission. "A weapon," he repeated. Tyson's expression darkened, shadows of old memories flickering across his face. "Declan Tyson wasn't always my name. A long time ago, I went by another. In certain circles, I was known as the Baba Yaga." Recognition flashed in Mike's eyes, followed by disbelief. "The Baba Yaga? That's just a story. A legend." "It's no legend," Tyson said quietly. It's who I was. A ghost. An assassin trained to eliminate threats with precision and without hesitation. Governments, cartels, warlords, they all had their own names for me. But the one thing they had in common was fear. Because once I was set on a target, there was no escape. Mike took a step back, his mind racing. He had heard the stories. Whispers of a man who could dismantle armies single-handedly. A shadow that left nothing but chaos in its wake. But those tales were always distant, exaggerated, something to be dismissed over a drink. To realize that his own president had been that figure was almost too much to process. I retired, Tyson continued, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of the past. Or at least, I tried to. After my family was taken from me, I made it my mission to end the ones responsible. And when the job was done, I walked away. I thought I could bury that part of me, start over, serve humanity in a way that didn't involve bloodshed. Mike swallowed hard, his throat dry. But it's still there, isn't it? That part of you. Tyson's eyes met his unflinching. It never really goes away. You don't survive the things I've done without leaving pieces of yourself behind. But I made a choice to use what's left of me to build something better. For Earth. For our future. The weight of Tyson's words settled between them, heavy and undeniable. Mike studied the man before him, seeing him now not just as the charismatic leader he had followed for years, but as a man shaped by pain, loss, and a brutal past. It was both terrifying and oddly reassuring. Before Mike could respond, a sharp beep sounded from the datapad in his hand. He glanced down, his brow furrowing. Sir, I think we have something. One of the attackers was wearing a transponder. It's faint, but I might be able to trace it. Tyson's demeanor shifted instantly, the weariness of his confession replaced by cold, focused determination. Do it, he said. If there's even a chance it leads us to whoever orchestrated this, we can't waste time. Mike nodded, his fingers flying across the datapad's interface. Give me a few minutes to lock it down. But if I may, sir, he hesitated, searching for the right words. What happens if this leads to someone in the council? Someone powerful? Tyson's expression hardened, the steel in his eyes unmistakable. Then we remind them that Earth doesn't roll over for anyone. And if they've forgotten why they used to fear the Baba Yaga, I'll make sure they remember. The determination in Tyson's voice left no room for doubt. Mike gave a quick nod, turning his attention back to the datapad. Despite the chaos and uncertainty of the moment, there was a strange sense of clarity in the air, a sense that, no matter what lay ahead, they would face it head-on. As Mike worked, Tyson allowed himself a brief moment to reflect. He had spent years running from his past, trying to bury the man he once was. But now, with enemies closing in and Earth's future hanging in the balance, he realized that the only way forward was to embrace the darkness he had tried so hard to leave behind. The faint hum of the datapad signaled Mike's success. Got it, he said, his voice tinged with urgency. It's weak, but the signal's leading us to a station on the outskirts of the Morven system. Looks like it's some kind of staging ground. Tyson nodded, his mind already calculating the next steps. Then that's where we're going. Mike hesitated. Just the two of us? Shouldn't we call for reinforcements, sir? Tyson's response was immediate, his tone firm. No. The more people involved, the more complicated this gets. We'll handle this ourselves. Besides, a faint smirk crossed his lips, one that sent a chill down Mike's spine. You'd be surprised what two men can do when one of them is me. With that, Tyson turned, his steps purposeful as he left the ruined chamber behind. Mike followed, the weight of what he had just learned pressing heavily on him. But despite the uncertainty, one thing was clear. Declan Tyson was not a man to be underestimated, and whoever had orchestrated the attack was about to find out exactly why. The Morven system loomed in the viewport, like a graveyard of forgotten ambitions. Its barren planets, swirling asteroid fields, and dim starlight created a desolate backdrop as Tyson and Mike approached in a small, unassuming spacecraft. The signal they had tracked pulsed faintly on the console, leading them to a station hidden among the shadows of a dense asteroid belt. It was the kind of place where secrets thrived, far from the prying eyes of law and order. Mike adjusted the controls, guiding the ship through the labyrinth of floating rock and debris. His focus was unwavering, but the tension in his jaw betrayed his unease. "This place gives me the creeps," he muttered, breaking the silence that had hung heavy between them. "Feels like it's been abandoned for centuries, but I'm guessing it hasn't." Tyson stood behind him, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Abandoned or not, someone's here," he said. "The signal's too clean to be accidental. Whoever's running this operation wanted to stay hidden. That alone tells us we're on the right track." The station came into view, a sprawling construct of jagged metal and rusted spires that seemed to claw at the void. Its design was haphazard, a patchwork of alien engineering that suggested it had been expanded and rebuilt over countless years. Dim lights flickered across its surface, casting eerie shadows that danced like ghosts. Mike brought the ship to a slow crawl, docking at a derelict port that groaned under the weight of their arrival. As the landing clamps engaged, he glanced back at Tyson. "We've got no backup, no escape plan, and no clue what we're walking into. Remind me again why this seemed like a good idea." Tyson allowed a faint smirk to tug at his lips. "Because we don't have time for caution," he said. "And because the only way to stop this is to take the fight to them." The airlock hissed open, releasing a gust of stale, metallic-smelling air. Tyson stepped out first, his movements deliberate and silent. Mike followed, his weapon drawn and his senses on high alert. The station's interior was as grim as its exterior. Dark corridors lined with exposed wiring, pools of stagnant water collecting on the uneven floors, and the occasional flicker of a dying light. Every step echoed ominously, a reminder of how isolated they were. They moved with purpose, following the signal deeper into the station. Tyson's every action was calculated, his assassin's instincts sharpening with each passing moment. Mike, meanwhile, couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. His eyes darted to every shadow, every flicker of movement, but the corridors remained empty. "Do you ever feel it?" Mike asked in a low voice. "That itch between your shoulder blades? Like someone's got a scope on you." Tyson didn't break stride. "All the time," he said. "The trick is to make them think you don't." Mike gave a humorless chuckle. "Easy for you to say." Their path eventually led them to a control room, its walls covered in monitors and consoles that hummed faintly with power. Tyson approached the main console, his fingers flying across the alien interface with practiced ease. The screens lit up, displaying a flurry of data that Tyson quickly sifted through. "This isn't just a staging ground," he said, his voice grim. "It's a relay hub. They've been monitoring Council communications, tracking ship movements and coordinating attacks from here." Mike leaned over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the screens. "So we're not just dealing with a rogue faction. This is a full-blown operation." Tyson nodded, "And it goes straight to King Soren. He's using the station to control his network without implicating himself directly. Clever." Mike's gaze narrowed, "but not clever enough to keep us out." Tyson's fingers stilled as he found what he was looking for, a set of coordinates buried in the station's logs. His jaw tightened. "These lead to Soren's fortress," he said, "the heart of his empire." Mike frowned. "And you think he's just sitting there, waiting for us to show up?" "No," Tyson replied, "but he'll be there. And if we're going to put an end to this, we need to face him head on." Before Mike could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Both men tensed, weapons drawn as a squad of armed mercenaries burst into the room. Their armor was mismatched but formidable, their weapons gleaming with lethal efficiency. "Well," Mike muttered, "guess we found who's been watching us." The lead mercenary, a hulking figure with a jagged scar across his face, leveled his weapon at Tyson. "You shouldn't have come here, human," he growled. "This place is a tomb, and you've just buried yourselves." Tyson didn't flinch. "Funny," he said, his tone calm but cutting. I was about to say the same to you. The fight erupted in an instant, the room exploding into chaos as gunfire and energy blasts filled the air. Tyson moved like a phantom, weaving through the melee with a lethal grace that left his enemies scrambling to keep up. He used the environment to his advantage, ducking behind consoles and using debris as improvised weapons. Mike held his own, his sharpshooting skills picking off mercenaries with precision. But even as they gained the upper hand, more reinforcements poured in, their sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm them. Tyson spotted an exposed power conduit on the far wall and made a split-second decision. "Cover me," he called to Mike, who nodded and unleashed a barrage of suppressing fire. Tyson sprinted toward the conduit, ripping a cable free and directing the surge of energy into the nearest group of mercenaries. Sparks flew and the enemies fell, convulsing as the current overwhelmed them. As the last mercenary hit the ground, the room fell silent once more. Mike leaned against a console, panting. "I'm starting to think you enjoy this," he said, his tone laced with dry humor. Tyson straightened, his breathing steady despite the exertion. "It's not about enjoyment," he said. "It's about finishing what needs to be done." He returned to the console, inputting the coordinates for Soren's fortress into their ship's navigation system. As the display confirmed the route, he turned to Mike. "This is it," he said. "No more detours. No more distractions. We take the fight to Soren, and we end this." Mike nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then let's make sure we do it right." With the coordinates set and their path clear, the two men left the ruined station behind, their ship disappearing into the void. Ahead of them lay the final confrontation, the culmination of everything that had led them to this moment. And while the odds were stacked against them, Tyson felt no fear. He had been forged in fire, and he was ready to face whatever awaited him. The fortress loomed ahead, a monolithic structure carved into the jagged cliffs of a desolate planet. Its silhouette was illuminated by the faint glow of volcanic activity in the distance, casting flickering shadows across the landscape. As Tyson and Mike approached in their small craft, they could see the fortress bristling with defenses, turrets, energy barriers, and patrols of heavily armed guards. It was an impenetrable stronghold, designed to intimidate and crush any who dared challenge it. Mike piloted the ship with practiced precision, keeping it low and fast to avoid detection. "This has to be the most suicidal plan you've ever come up with," he muttered, his eyes scanning the fortress for vulnerabilities. "And that's saying something." Tyson, seated beside him, studied the layout of the fortress on a holographic display. "It's not suicidal," he said, his voice calm and steady. "It's calculated. Every fortress has a weak point. We just have to find it. And if we don't," Mike asked, raising an eyebrow. Tyson glanced at him, the faintest hint of a smirk playing at his lips. "Then we make one." The ship descended into a narrow canyon that ran along the side of the fortress, its rocky walls providing temporary cover. Tyson gathered their gear, blasters, knives, explosives, while Mike adjusted the ship's systems to mask their presence. The tension between them was palpable, but it was tempered by the unspoken trust they had built over years of working together. When they reached the canyon floor, they disembarked silently, their boots crunching against the volcanic rock. The air was thick and acrid, the heat oppressive, but neither man flinched. Tyson led the way, his movements precise and deliberate, while Mike followed closely, his weapon at the ready. They navigated the canyon until they reached a ventilation shaft hidden behind a cluster of jagged rocks. Tyson crouched beside it, examining the grating. "This leads to the lower levels of the fortress," he said. "If we can get inside undetected, we'll have the element of surprise." Mike nodded, kneeling beside him. "And if they catch us before we get to Soren?" Tyson's gaze didn't waver. "Then we make sure they regret it," with Mike covering him. Tyson pried the grating loose and slipped inside, his movements silent as a shadow. The shaft was narrow and dark, the hum of machinery echoing faintly in the distance. They moved quickly, their breathing steady despite the tension that coiled in the air like a spring. When they emerged in a dimly lit corridor deep within the fortress, They were greeted by the low, rhythmic thrum of alien machinery. The walls were lined with conduits and panels that glowed faintly, casting an eerie light. Tyson gestured for Mike to follow as he led the way toward the central chamber, where Soren was likely to be. They encountered their first patrol just around the corner, a group of 4 heavily armed guards. Tyson acted instantly, his body a blur of motion as he dispatched 2 of them with swift, precise strikes. Mike took out the remaining 2 with well-placed shots, his blaster barely making a sound. As they moved deeper into the fortress, the resistance grew fiercer. Alarms blared and squads of guards swarmed the corridors, but Tyson and Mike pressed on, their movements a seamless blend of strategy and instinct. Tyson's years of training were evident in every strike, every dodge, every calculated decision, while Mike's steady aim and quick thinking provided crucial support. Finally, they reached the central chamber, a vast hall dominated by an ornate throne of dark metal. King Soren sat upon it, his massive frame radiating power and authority. His obsidian-black eyes gleamed as he rose to his feet, a cruel smile curling across his lips. "You've come far, human," Soren said, his voice a deep, resonant growl. "Farther than I expected, but this is where your journey ends." Tyson stepped forward, his gaze locked on Soren. "You made a mistake," he said, his voice steady and cold. "You thought you could intimidate humanity. You thought you could kill me and get away with it. But now you're about to learn what happens when you push too far." Soren laughed, a low, rumbling sound that echoed through the chamber. "You think you can challenge me? I am a king. The might of the Ovari Empire flows through my veins. You are nothing but a relic of a dying world." Without another word, Soren lunged, his massive form moving with surprising speed. Tyson dodged the initial strike, his movements fluid as he countered with a series of precise attacks. The 2 clashed in a blur of motion, their strikes sending shock waves through the chamber. Mike provided cover, taking out guards who tried to intervene, but the battle between Tyson and Soren was the true spectacle. Soren's strength was immense, each blow capable of shattering stone, but Tyson's speed and skill kept him 1 step ahead. He fought with a ruthless efficiency, every move calculated to exploit Soren's weaknesses. The fight reached its climax when Soren, in a moment of overconfidence, left himself open. Tyson seized the opportunity, delivering a devastating blow that sent the alien king crashing to the ground. He stood over Soren, his blade poised for the final strike. "You brought this on yourself," Tyson said, his voice cold and unyielding. "This ends now." With a swift, decisive motion, he drove the blade into Soren's chest. The alien king let out a final roar of defiance before falling silent, his massive form slumping lifelessly to the floor. The remaining guards, seeing their leader defeated, began to retreat, their morale shattered. Tyson and Mike stood amidst the chaos, their breathing heavy but their resolve unbroken. "It's done," Mike said, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "We actually did it." Tyson nodded, his gaze lingering on Soren's fallen form. "It's done," he echoed, though his tone carried a weight that suggested he knew this victory came at a cost. As they made their way out of the fortress, the alarm still blaring in the background, Mike glanced at Tyson. "So what now?" he asked. "What do we tell the council?" Tyson didn't answer immediately. He stared ahead, his expression unreadable. "We tell them the truth," he finally said, "that humanity won't be underestimated. Not ever again." They stepped back into the barren landscape, the fortress burning behind them, and boarded their ship. As they left the desolate planet and its defeated king behind, Tyson allowed himself a rare moment of quiet reflection. He had faced the darkness of his past and emerged victorious, but he knew the fight for humanity's place in the galaxy was far from over. For now, though, they had won, and that was enough.